It was the kind of trip most families dream of. The Monroe family had been saving for nearly 2 years for this cruise. Danielle and Mark Monroe, both teachers from Asheville, North Carolina, wanted to give their twin daughters, Lacey and Lacey, the most unforgettable 14th birthday. The girls were inseparable, curious, and full of energy, known for their matching hairstyles, synchronized jokes, and a love for documenting everything on their shared vlog. The Ocean Serenity cruise promised 7 days of tropical adventures, swimming with dolphins, ziplining across rainforest canopies, and late-night buffets. From the moment they boarded, the girls were enchanted. It was paradise afloat. Or at least, it seemed like it. The first few days passed in a blur of sunshine, family selfies, and excitement. Leah and Lacey explored every corner of the ship, from the arcade on Deck 3 to the ice cream station near the top pool deck. They made fast friends with a few other teens their age, even participating in a karaoke night where they sang a duet, to roaring applause. Their parents watched proudly from the audience, capturing the moment on their phones. At dinner, the twins excitedly talked about the upcoming masquerade party scheduled for night 4. They already picked their outfits, identical silver dresses and feathered masks they had ordered months in advance. It was going to be the highlight of their trip. On the night of the masquerade, the grand ballroom on Deck 9 glittered with lights and laughter. Over 300 guests, many in costume, danced under chandeliers while a live band played. Leah and Lacey, in their silver outfits and matching braided buns, twirled across the floor with carefree joy. Multiple guests later recalled seeing them that night, one even describing how the twins moved like mirror images. At precisely 9:47 p.m., security footage showed them exiting the ballroom hand in hand. Heading toward the midship elevators, they were giggling, their silver masks perched atop their heads. That was the last time anyone could say, with certainty, they saw the Monroe twins alive. What happened after they stepped off that elevator remains one of the most chilling mysteries of the case. By 10:10 p.m., when the ballroom began winding down, Danielle realized the girls weren't by the dessert table where they had promised to meet. At first, she assumed they had gone back to their room. But when she checked, the cabin was empty. Mark started asking around casually at first, then with rising panic. Within 30 minutes, the staff was notified. An initial announcement was made, over the intercom, asking for Leah and Lacey to report to guest services. There was no response. A second announcement followed. Still silence. Somewhere between 2 decks, 2 brightly dressed girls had seemingly vanished on a tightly secured ship. The atmosphere on board shifted instantly. Crew members initiated a rapid internal search protocol. Locked doors were opened, surveillance tapes were reviewed, and officers began sweeping each level. Some passengers joined the search. Others began to whisper. The girls' belongings were untouched in the cabin, phones charging by the bed, their journal open with doodles from earlier that day. There were no signs of struggle. No noise had been reported. No one saw them in the stairwells or pool areas. It was as if Leah and Lacey had simply stepped out of reality and into a void somewhere in the belly of the ship. What was supposed to be a birthday celebration had taken a horrifying turn, and the nightmare was only just beginning. As the initial shock turned into a full-blown emergency, the ship's captain, Gregory Harlan, was alerted and made an immediate decision: halt all entertainment, secure the perimeter, and begin an official search. It was 11:15 p.m. when the crew was placed on lockdown protocol. Something rarely enacted during a voyage, unless under extreme circumstances. The Ocean Serenity was hundreds of miles from the nearest shore, floating in the blackness of the Atlantic. The waves crashed gently against its hull as party lights dimmed and a creeping unease settled over the passengers. Crew members were instructed to search all common areas, restrooms, storage closets, and passenger cabins. But every turn seemed to produce the same result. Nothing, no sign of the girls. Meanwhile, Danielle and Mark Monroe were visibly unraveling. Mark retraced the twins' last known steps, going back to the ballroom, asking passengers, showing photos of their daughters to anyone who would look. Danielle stood near the elevators, sobbing, convinced they had simply gotten off on the wrong deck and gotten lost. But the elevators had surveillance cameras. 2 footage showed the girls stepping off on Deck 7. After that, the feed went blank. The nearest hallway camera had glitched, a technical error logged that same night. Investigators would later discover that this camera, oddly, had gone offline just 4 minutes after the twins exited the lift. That 4-minute gap would become the focal point of a much deeper mystery. Adding to the growing anxiety, a steward named Javier claimed he might have seen the girls near the freight elevators. He described seeing two small figures masked, barefoot, and whispering trying to open the heavy crew-only access door around 10 p.m. He dismissed it as a prank or part of a costume act and didn't report it until the next morning. By then, the ship had already sent a distress message to the U.S. Coast Guard. Within hours, helicopters were dispatched from Miami, circling the vessel in wide patterns. Divers were dropped into the water, searching for any sign of bodies or floating debris. The entire ship slowed its journey and began a slow, circular path, hoping to retrace wherever the twins might have fallen overboard, if that were even the case. By sunrise, the mood aboard Ocean Serenity had changed entirely. Families kept their children close. Passengers whispered theories, some cruel, others fantastical. There were murmurs of stowaways, human trafficking, cult activity, even supernatural explanations. Meanwhile, the crew's search expanded to the lowest levels of the ship, areas not typically accessible to guests. Laundry rooms, engine compartments, and staff quarters were combed through. Cadaver dogs were flown in and brought aboard when the ship returned briefly to port. They reacted strangely around the service corridor leading to the ship's hull, but nothing was found. The twins' presence, once vibrant and documented on so many phones just hours before, had now become an invisible echo on a ship surrounded by nothing but endless sea. And yet, in the midst of this frenzy, one glaring fact remained. No one heard a scream. No signs of a struggle were discovered. Their cabin showed no evidence of tampering. Their belongings to half-drunk juice bottles, Leah's sketchbook, and Lacey's travel diary were still sitting where they left them. It was almost as if the twins had voluntarily walked into the ship's skeleton and vanished willingly. Or worse, as if someone knew exactly where the cameras would fail and how to make two children disappear without leaving a trace. The Monroe family was no longer on a vacation. They were now trapped in a floating crime scene, haunted by silence and the suffocating weight of unanswered questions. As authorities dug deeper into the ship's passenger manifest, one name stood out almost immediately: Darius Wynn, a man assigned to cabin 1143. Just a few doors down from the Monroe family. Unlike most passengers, Darius boarded alone, brought no checked luggage, and paid for his ticket in cash at the last minute, an unusual occurrence for a luxury cruise. He didn't participate in any onboard activities, skipped all meals in the dining hall, and ignored housekeeping requests. Staff members recalled that his cabin always had the "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the door, and no one remembered seeing him smile or speak more than a few words. To most passengers, he was invisible, but to investigators, he became an immediate person of interest. When security reviewed hallway footage from Deck 11, where his cabin was located, they noticed something unusual. While Darius was rarely seen during the day, the cameras captured him leaving his room multiple times after midnight, always wearing a plain black hoodie and cap, often carrying something tucked beneath his jacket. On the night of the masquerade, he was recorded standing at the far end of the hallway just minutes after the twins exited the elevator, motionless, staring down the corridor where the girls had vanished. His cabin's proximity to the malfunctioning security camera added another disturbing layer to the growing suspicion, and when investigators entered his room after he had disembarked in Nassau, what they found was beyond alarming. The room appeared bare at first glance, almost sterile. The bed was neatly made, no clothing in the drawers, no toiletries in the bathroom. But tucked beneath the mattress was a small metal box, and inside it were several chilling items. A child's hairbrush engraved with the name Lacey, a worn-down plush rabbit missing one eye, a vintage cruise line brochure dated 1999, and a collection of black and white Polaroid photographs, each one showing isolated sections of the ship's lower, crew-only levels. One photo, in particular, showed the back of a girl with long blonde hair, walking alone through a shadowed corridor. Her face wasn't visible, but the size and hair matched Leah's description. And on the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Almost there." Even more unsettling was the coded journal found behind a loose panel near the desk. Page after page was filled with strange symbols, maps of the ship marked with red X's, and crude drawings of what looked like children's faces, some smiling, others scribbled out in thick black ink. One drawing resembled the layout of the lower cargo hold, with arrows pointing to what appeared to be an unlisted room. And next to it, the initials LM+LM were scrawled over and over again. When the FBI ran the name Darius Wynn through multiple databases, they hit a wall. The ID he used was fake. The name didn't exist. His passport was a forgery, expertly crafted. His real identity, if it ever existed, a mystery? Despite multiple efforts, Darius Wynn was never located after disembarking in the Bahamas. His trail vanished like smoke. Hotel staff at the nearby island port said a man matching his description rented a room for one night and left before dawn. He didn't use credit cards. He left no fingerprints. The room he stayed in was found, with black tape over the peephole and pages from the local phone book torn out. Specifically the section listing charter boat rentals. There was no doubt now, someone on board the Ocean Serenity had meticulously planned something, and the man in cabin 1143, whoever he really was, likely knew exactly what happened to Leah and Lacey Monroe, but with no way to trace him, the authorities were left with a cabin full of haunting clues and a family sinking deeper into despair as media attention grew and federal investigators widened their probe. The ship's crew, initially tight and instructed to follow corporate PR scripts, began to quietly talk. Off the record, several longtime employees hinted at a dark undercurrent within the Ocean Serenity. One former deckhand, who worked on the ship for nearly a decade, told investigators that there were parts of the vessel not listed on modern blueprints, areas inherited from when the ship was first constructed in the late 1980s, during an era with looser maritime regulations. These hidden areas, he said, were known among the older staff as SeaDeck, a section once used for crew discipline, storage, and rumor had it, even unsanctioned detainment of unruly guests. Although officially decommissioned, whispers remained of sealed doors and padlocked corridors still hidden behind false walls. One janitor, a quiet man in his 50s named Elias Navarro, described hearing something deeply unsettling. He often worked the overnight shift in the service corridors, narrow, dimly lit tunnels used only by staff to move between decks quickly without crossing passenger areas. 4 weeks before the twins vanished, Elias claimed he heard soft knocking and crying sounds coming from an air vent near the laundry chute on Deck 6. He initially dismissed it as noise from shifting machinery or the vibrations from the engines, but one night, shortly before the Monroe twins boarded the ship, he swore he heard a child's voice whispering, "Let me out." He reported it once to his supervisor, who laughed and told him to get some rest. After that, he stayed silent. Then there was Maria Lopez, a housekeeping staffer who had been with the cruise line for 6 years. Maria's story was even more disturbing. The night of the Masquerade, around 10:20 p.m., she was wheeling a cart of fresh linens toward the staff laundry elevator when she saw something that made her blood run cold. Down the hallway, dim and quiet, she spotted a man in a dark crew uniform holding the hands of 2 barefoot girls. She recognized them immediately, Leah and Lacey. The girls looked dazed, as if drugged or confused. When she approached and asked if everything was all right, the man turned and gave her a hard, expressionless stare. "Crew transfer," he said, flatly. Maria backed off, thinking maybe it was an emergency. The next morning, when she learned the twins were missing, she panicked. She filed a report. 2 days later, she was reassigned to a different vessel without warning. Another worker, who chose to remain completely anonymous, claimed there was an unspoken rule among veteran crew: never go near the aft cold storage after midnight. It was a creepy old section of the ship rarely used, and most avoided it out of superstition, but one young maintenance tech once dared his friend to go down there during a night shift. He returned, pale and shaking, refusing to explain what he saw. When pressed, all he said was, "There are things down there that aren't supposed to be." These odd claims were dismissed as sailor's lore or drunken tales until the Monroe case. Suddenly, the stories were being remembered differently, not as jokes, but as warnings that had gone ignored. Despite all these testimonies, corporate management for the cruise line vehemently denied the existence of any secret decks or closed-off compartments. They insisted all areas of the ship were accounted for, and any claims otherwise were fabrications. But investigators found inconsistencies in the maintenance logs, suspicious gaps in staff activity reports, and heat signatures on thermal scans of the ship that did not align with the known architecture. Something was there, something that had been buried behind decades of silence and layers of metal. And if the whispers were true, then perhaps the Monroe twins weren't the first to disappear on the Ocean Serenity. They were just the latest in a trail of darkness no one had dared shine a light on, until now. For nearly 10 months after Leah and Lacey Monroe vanished, the world seemed to move on, but the Monroe family couldn't. The cruise line offered carefully worded condolences and quietly refunded passengers. while corporate lawyers blocked further access to internal surveillance and crew rosters. Media coverage flared briefly, then dulled under pressure. Yet behind the scenes, the investigation dragged on in fragments. The FBI, local law enforcement, and even international agencies opened case files, but leads ran dry. Search dogs brought to the ship weeks later found nothing. The ship continued to sail, carrying new passengers, as if nothing had happened. For Danielle and Mark Monroe, life became a never-ending loop of press interviews, dead-end tips, and silent nights haunted by what-ifs. Danielle became obsessed with the cruise footage, watching the same grainy elevator recording over and over again, analyzing the shadows, the angles, the strange flicker of static that occurred just after the girls stepped off. Mark built a wall in their basement covered in timelines, ship blueprints, and photos of every crew member who had been aboard. Private investigators were hired, online sleuths joined forums dedicated to the case, and even former ship employees anonymously sent in tips. But nothing led anywhere solid. Every supposed sighting of the twins ended in heartbreak. Their belongings remained untouched in their bedroom at home, their last TikTok frozen in time. Then, in early June, everything changed with the discovery of a suitcase on a remote stretch of shoreline in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The suitcase was waterlogged, battered by months at sea, and covered in barnacles. It was discovered by a local fisherman named Walter Crane, who was collecting driftwood along the rocky coast when he saw something wedged between stones. The case was zip-tied shut and unusually heavy for its size. At first, Walter thought it might contain tools or trash, but when he noticed the faded Ocean Serenity cruise line tag still attached to the handle, he called authorities. The Coast Guard retrieved it and carefully transported it to a local forensics lab. Inside was a small collection of items that sent a jolt through investigators. A single pink ballet slipper, discolored from seawater. A lock of blonde hair, carefully wrapped in a plastic bag. A cracked hand mirror with childlike doodles drawn through the dust, and most disturbingly, a hotel brochure from Nassau, August 21st, the exact day the ship had docked nearly 10 months earlier. Every item in the suitcase seemed to whisper fragments of a story. The ballet slipper was identified as matching a pair the twins had worn to the masquerade party, verified by family photos. The hair sample underwent rapid DNA testing, confirming it belonged to Leah Monroe. But it was the cracked mirror that drew the most attention. Traced into the dust with a finger were faint words, nearly lost to time and grime. "We're still here." Beneath it, etched lightly into the glass, were the initials L+L, surrounded by what looked like a key symbol or lock. Analysts couldn't determine how the items survived in such preserved condition, or why the suitcase had drifted so far from the cruise's route. Had it been dumped from another vessel? Planted, or worse, had someone wanted it to be found? The discovery ignited the investigation all over again. News outlets picked the story back up, headlines screamed about the suitcase of clues, and public interest surged. Tips began pouring in once more, but now the case had taken on a darker, more deliberate tone. This wasn't just about a disappearance, it was about a message. Someone had kept these items. Someone had waited months. Someone had decided the time was right to release them into the world. At a location so far removed from the Caribbean that it raised an impossible question. How did the suitcase end up off the coast of North Carolina? And more chillingly, was it a breadcrumb meant to guide, or a warning meant to silence? The moment the DNA results confirmed the hair sample belonged to Leah Monroe, federal agents treated the suitcase as a direct communication, one that had to be decoded carefully. It wasn't just the contents themselves that sent chills down their spines. It was how personal and specific they were. The items weren't random. They were curated. The ballet slipper hadn't just been from a similar parrot, had the faint remnants of Lacey's hand-drawn star on the heel, something she had been known to doodle on all her shoes. The cracked mirror, though damaged, was clearly used. Traced through its dusty surface was something far more deliberate than innocent scribbling. The phrase "we're still here," written in what appeared to be a child's finger, didn't just feel like a cry for help, it felt like a warning. Forensic analysts worked around the clock, scrutinizing every fiber, smudge, and symbol beneath the message. L+L was scratched into the glass, likely standing for Leah and Lacey, but just below it was something else. What initially looked like a random doodle was magnified and enhanced, revealing what many believed was the outline of a key or an old lock mechanism. Was it symbolic? Or a literal clue? Experts debated the meaning. One profiler from the Behavioral Analysis Unit suggested the drawing indicated the twins had been locked away, possibly still alive. Another theory proposed that the key represented a place, perhaps a hidden compartment, a coded location, or even a person known by that name. Even more disturbing was the condition of the mirror. Though the surface was cracked, it had been carefully wrapped in layers of clothing before being placed in the suitcase. It hadn't broken accidentally, had been preserved. Investigators took special notice of this. Whoever packed this suitcase had taken time, care, almost as if they were building a time capsule. And what about the hair sample? It had been placed in a resealable plastic pouch, not simply yanked and thrown in. The implication was terrifying. Someone had collected it with surgical precision. Someone had kept it safe. This wasn't the work of a casual abductor. It pointed to premeditation, obsession, or worse, a network with experience. The hotel brochure added yet another layer of mystery. It was from a small, independently owned resort in Nosanat, affiliated with the cruise line. The back was circled in red ink around one particular ad, a sunset tour near a private island called Little Dead Man's Cay, a name that didn't appear on any current maps. When traced through historical archives, the name was found in a 1987 maritime registry as a tiny reef outcropping that had long since been removed from cruise itineraries due to dangerous currents. Why would this outdated brochure be included? Who circled the island? Was it meant as a clue to the twins' location or a distraction? Local authorities combed the nearby waters, but conditions were rough and visibility poor. No signs of recent activity were found, but the symbolic placement of the brochure couldn't be ignored. Back at the Monroe home, Danielle couldn't stop staring at the photograph of the mirror. She swore the handwriting in the dust belonged to Leah. It had the same looping lowercase e's, the same way she always wrote her L's with extra curves. She wrote that, Danielle insisted in a national interview, her voice shaking. They're telling us they're alive. But not everyone agreed. One chilling countertheory came from an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be a former crew member, that the mirror wasn't a message from the girls but from their abductor, mocking the family, using their own style, their own words. We're still here, the message read. But where was here? And why now? After 10 months of silence, was someone ready to talk? With the discovery of the suitcase and the haunting message on the mirror, law enforcement knew they were no longer chasing a cold case, they were following a live trail. The FBI reclassified the case from a missing persons file to an active criminal investigation with trafficking potential. This change unlocked additional resources, including international cooperation from Interpol and Homeland Security task forces specializing in maritime abductions. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized this was far from an isolated case. Buried within maritime records were reports of 2 other missing children, both girls, ages 9 and 11, who had vanished aboard the Ocean Serenity, one in 1999, the other in 2004. Both cases had been quietly closed after insufficient evidence and non-disclosure settlements with the families. The Monroe case reopened those buried files, and disturbing patterns began to surface. All 3 disappearances occurred during nighttime events, in areas of the ship with camera blind spots or technical malfunctions. In each case, the missing children were last seen near crew-only access points. The name Darius Wynn never appeared in the earlier files, but when investigators cross-referenced the Ocean Serenity's employee rosters from 2 decades earlier, a name with a similar profile emerged: Dale Winthrop, a former staff technician who had been terminated in 2000 following complaints of inappropriate behavior and suspected falsified documentation. His physical description matched Darius Wynn almost exactly. Even more disturbing, Dale Winthrop had never been prosecuted, and his whereabouts had been unknown for nearly 20 years until now, as teams dug into archived ship blueprints and conducted infrared scans of the vessel. They uncovered subtle anomalies, thermal signatures in sections of the hull that shouldn't have any activity. One scan revealed faint heat patterns in what was believed to be a sealed-off storage chamber beneath the lower deck. When a team boarded the Ocean Serenity during its off-season docking in San Juan, they discovered a false wall behind a linen storage closet. When removed, it revealed a narrow, soundproof corridor that led to a bolted metal door. Behind it was a small room, windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb, with peeling paint and old cruise posters from the 90s still on the wall. There were no windows, no furniture, except for a rusted metal cot and a silver masquerade mask. Sitting on the floor, FBI forensic teams descended on the room. Dust samples were pulled, DNA swabs collected, and paint flakes sent for aging. But it wasn't the physical evidence that disturbed agents. Most it was the drawings scratched into the metal walls, stick figures, hearts, tally marks. One drawing showed two girls holding hands, with one larger figure looming above them. Another had the initials L+L drawn repeatedly, circled, and crossed out. Scratched into the inside of the door was a chilling phrase: "Don't open unless you're alone." The room had been intentionally hidden and forgotten, yet it felt recently used. One agent later described the air inside as thick with memory, as if the room had absorbed the fear of whoever had last been kept there. Just weeks after the discovery of the hidden chamber, a second suitcase washed ashore, this time on a private beach in the Bahamas, 700 miles from the first. This one was smaller, rusted at the edges, and carried no tags. Inside was a single item, a child's sketchbook, water-damaged but partially intact. On one page, a rough map of what resembled a cruise ship was drawn in crayon. There were arrows pointing from room to dark place, to no sound, to cold floor. On the final page, two stick figures stood on a shore. One had an X over its head. The other was pointing to something just off the edge of the page, a shape that looked like a lighthouse, or perhaps a signal. The implication was clear: someone was still alive. Someone was still trying to be found. To this day, the fate of Leah and Lacey Monroe remains shrouded in darkness. The two suitcases, ashore hundreds of miles apart, seem less like lost items and more like breadcrumbs. Clues carefully planted by someone who wanted to be heard, but not found. Despite the discoveries, the coded mirror message, the sealed-off chamber, the drawing scratched into cold steel, no arrests have been made. No body has been recovered. And no one has definitively answered the one question that haunts everyone. Who followed this case? Are Leah and Lacey still alive? Or is someone simply making it look that way? The Ocean Serenity has since returned to service, repainted and rebranded under a new name. Families continue to board, unaware of the history that sleeps in its walls. And while the Monroe family clings to hope, others believe something far older and more sinister is at play, something hiding beneath polished decks and smiling staff, something that waits. And sometimes whispers. So, the next time you step onto a cruise ship, ask yourself, how many doors are there that were never meant to be opened? And if they were, what might still be locked behind them?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.